the 2015 World Technology Summit and Awards. Welcome also to those of you watching by live webcast around the world. We wish you were here. My father died over 6 years ago. Before he died, I never really had the talk with him, the talk that I should have had. He was diagnosed with cancer 11 years ago. Over the 5 years of battling, particularly in the final months, he had long periods where he spent most of his time in bed. I was with him by his bedside often. Picture a once strong, funny, stubborn, and supremely athletic man shrinking in every possible way in his capacities before my very eyes. There were so many things I wanted to say to him, discuss with him, work out in my head about him, or about me and him, or about me through him, and I never did it. Early on, I kept telling myself that I would wait until he was a bit stronger. And then when he did get a little bit stronger, it seemed as if to have the talk would imply that he wasn't going to get better. So I'd put it off. And then when he'd get weaker, I'd think it wasn't fair to put him through the talk. Then, because it seemed like the thing you would do before someone is gone. And I didn't want him or me to feel he was going to be gone. So I kept putting it off and off and off. And I will always have such deep regret that we'd never had that talk, that once-in-a-lifetime talk. You see, in the culture of my family, there were things we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about deep love and heartache and deep dreams and fears. We talked about people we knew and events that had happened and things we had to do next. But most of the time we did so in a superficial way, never going very deep, never exploring the hidden caves and twisting tunnels beneath the surface. We didn't talk about the most important things. The most important things that made us uncomfortable precisely because they were so meaningful. A lot of people are like that. A lot of families are like that. In fact, I would argue that our entire global civilization right now is like that. It's avoiding talking about certain things. There are things we don't talk about, some of the most important things. And unless we talk about the most important things, the things we deep down know are the most important, the 21st century is not going to end up being much better than the 20th, and perhaps a lot worse. What do we not talk about? Here are 7 topics I think that are worth mentioning. 1, the societal epidemic of loneliness. 2, the coming massive wave of technological unemployment. 3, what I call the bullshit chain in the technology business. 4, what used to be called the system in which we live and work. 5, the reality that history isn't linear. 6, that we are more emotional than we are rational. And 7, the fact that I think the first 6 are all related. You may ask why I am possibly focusing on them in my opening keynote address at the World Technology Summit. I have asked myself that same question. I'll try to tie it all together in the end. Bear with me. Okay, let's talk about the first one, the societal epidemic of loneliness. Loneliness may be the most common form of suffering in the world today, and I and many others think it is getting worse. Studies have shown that when people are injected with the virus that causes the common cold, those with strong social connections did not get as sick and didn't stay sick as long. Research shows that loneliness is almost as much a cause of death as poverty and twice as bad for older people as obesity. The risk of mortality from loneliness is apparently like smoking 15 cigarettes a day and being an alcoholic. And loneliness makes us depressed. By the way, the mean age of the first episode of depression 4 decades ago was almost 30. Now it's 14 and a half. As John and Stephanie Cacioppo explained in New Scientist recently, loneliness isn't just actually being alone. but can also be what it feels like when a person is on the social perimeter of a group. This is a key insight. For any animal, when it feels like it's on the edge of the community, that creature goes into self-preservation mode, because the edge is where our evolutionary past says is most dangerous. A study published by the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP, described how 1/3 of adults over age 45 said they were chronically lonely. It was around a fifth only a decade ago. We certainly do not live in an era without the opportunity for connection. We live, after all, in the age of social media. As emotionally rewarding as can be the connections we make in the digital universe, we evolved as creatures of full connection, face-to-face, or side-by-side, with touch and gesture, surrounded by physical heat and smell. Clearly, too many of us are feeling on the social perimeter, and our bodies and minds are reacting accordingly. Second thing we don't talk about, the coming massive wave of technological unemployment. On September 29th, here in this room, our organization convened the first ever World Summit on Technological Unemployment. To open that event, I spoke about the concept of creative destruction. It's the idea that the disruption of an economy from innovation will lead to the suffering of some, particularly via unemployment, but that eventually there would be more wealth created for all. I'm the founder and chairman of the World Technology Network, the organization hosting you today, a global community of the peer-elected most innovative people and organizations in science and technology and related fields. I bring this up not only to explain what is the WTN, but to say that when I speak about the creative destruction that results from today's technological innovations, we have a front row seat. So we must ask ourselves, is there something fundamentally different about our time? I think there is. In the past, technological innovation on a scale truly disruptive to an industry or a way of life occurred every few decades, and not in every industry at once, nor in a single globalized economy, nor with such a long life expectancy for workers. And most importantly, in the past, most new technologies did not have the truly transformative and multi-purpose power of so many of the newest technologies today or those coming soon. Think of the power of these new complex technologies: advanced software, robotics, 3D printing, disintermediation via the internet, cutting-edge brain science, and other medical breakthroughs, just to name a few, and the speed they are hitting almost everywhere. To expect that all of this won't create massive unemployment challenges over the next couple decades and beyond is, as I said in this room 2 months ago, either incredibly naive or, frankly, impressively delusional. I'm worried about my kids' future, about how nasty politics could get, about growing income inequality, and so many other possible ripple effects. It is conceivable, of course, that all of these new technologies here now and coming down the pike will generate an untold level of prosperity and opportunity for humanity. Indeed, the end of the drudgery of required work could be the bridge to an unprecedented period of human creativity if we can make the transition. Third thing we don't talk about, what I call the bullshit chain in the technology business. What I'm about to say is not meant to describe anyone in the room, or anyone I know, or have ever met, or ever will meet, or ever might meet. Any resemblance to anyone alive or dead is just a figment of your very overactive imagination and your desire, I know you, your desire to create scandal out of utter coincidence. Having said that disclaimer, here's what I mean. Investors in VC funds or in crowd-funded initiatives, or in the stock markets themselves, of course, want to believe that they are on to something hot. VCs or other investors want to hear good news from the companies they're invested in, so they can tell others or themselves that they're on to something hot. The managers of startups and other supposedly innovative companies pressure their staff to come up with short-term good news, usually described as, quote-unquote, making progress, even at the expense of long-term strategy, which they can tell to investors and which can generate media coverage. Editors, who are now often both editors and publishers in the media, pressure reporters to come up with breathless good news stories, which companies are happy to feed them, with the help of PR staff hired just for that purpose. The VCs or crowdfunding project entrepreneurs or investment firms show the investors in their funds the media coverage in order to comfort the investors and likely seek to raise more funding, which puts more pressure for good news to be generated in a vicious cycle. I call this the bullshit chain. You either recognize what I'm saying or not. If you say you don't recognize it at all, then guess what? I don't believe you. 4, something we don't talk about. What used to be called the system in which we live and work. We live and work in an incredibly complex civilization built around a wide variety of institutions and a wide variety of rules and laws and subsystems that determine to a large degree what we do and are able to do with our lives. There are pockets of diversity, of course, across the world in various ways and signs of positive experimentation, but at the moment they don't dominate. The dominant political systems are either democratic, but not nearly as democratic as purported to be, or authoritarian. The dominant education system is still some version or another of the factory model from the 19th century. The dominant healthcare system is reactive rather than proactive. The dominant energy system is built around non-renewable resources. And the dominant food system is increasingly based on industrial farming with industrial goals. The dominant entertainment system, of course, is increasingly standardized and homogenized. The dominant religious systems are by their nature largely ideologically exclusive and externally conflict-prone. And the dominant economic system is, of course, traditional capitalism, the domain of creative destruction. These subsystems all impact and drive and serve and determine the nature and direction of each other. And taken together, they are so tightly interwoven into one single global system, we could describe as the single infrastructure and rule book of our global civilization. For the sake of brevity, let's do what others have done before and call it the system. We forget there is nothing sacred or permanent about the way things are. We forget that things haven't always been this way and do not have to remain this way. To complain too loudly about the system is considered a risk to varying degrees depending on what country you live, but a risk everywhere to some degree. In some places, you can go to jail or be killed for it. In other places, you might lose your job or just be considered too radical with whom to be associated. Even in those places where the only risk is social risk, the anxiety has to do with the fact that virtually everyone and every organization and every job is so embedded in the system that to question it is to cry out that the emperor has no clothes to an entire society in the emperor clothing business. 5, we don't talk about the fact that history isn't linear. We live our lives and plan our careers and strategize for our business on the assumption, or at least in blind and hopeful faith, that history is linear. We even have dreams about our future on the assumption that this is true. We buy homes and take out college loans and do so much else on the assumption that because we have a personal familiarity, by definition, with our past and the world around us in the present, that we can sense the smooth trajectory of the future. Now, I'm not saying that it's not a smart thing to do to extrapolate from the past into the future. In the absence of any special divine knowledge or any precognitive psychic abilities, basing your prediction on the future, on the past, is a good thing to do. It's a good way to plan. And planning is a good thing to do. But we all know that things happen that change the direction of lives, of businesses, of industries, of nations, and sometimes even of civilization itself. But we don't have to live that way. We pretend this is not the case. What I'm saying is that we need to remind ourselves that the only thing we can expect is the unexpected. And we cannot expect history is going to head into some glorious utopian sci-fi future simply because that is the future we have always imagined we were heading towards. In history, calm is not a sign of things to come. Calm is not the natural state of society. A calm is usually the calm before the storm. And the storm doesn't usually turn out even to be the one we thought we began to understand just as it hit. That's why history is forever interesting. There is no end of history. We don't talk about this, the fact that we are more emotional creatures than we are rational. People make decisions believing that they are using their rational minds, applying rational thinking, and often this actually occurs. But it seems to me, and I expect you, that when our rationality doesn't give us the recommendations we want, we switch from rational thinking to rationalization. We motivate ourselves through emotion. We motivate others to help us through emotion. Others motivate us the same way. You might get people's attention because they think what you say makes sense, but then they follow you because of how you make them feel about you, your community, or your cause. We know this is true, but we too often behave as if we are the sane and rational one, and everyone else is frustratingly irrational, unpredictable, and unconvincible of what we already know. Evolution has given us a gift of the capacity for rationality unrivaled in the animal kingdom, except perhaps when a dolphin is thinking alone. Humanity has done great things with its rationality, but we credit our accomplishments too often to the rationality that helped us generate a strategy, not the emotion that made us want to pursue it. Final thing we don't think about, the fact that the first 6 points that I made are all related. How? Well, I consider everything interrelated, but this could be considered a cop-out answer, unless it's 2 a.m. on a Saturday night and when you're with your best friends and in the mood where everything anyone says just seems to make sense. Indeed, since it is the morning in a conference room in the middle of Manhattan, on a workday, when you hope and pray that something, anything makes sense, how about this? Too many want to live in a certain way and don't feel they are living the way they'd like. And yet the system they live embedded within makes them feel as if they can't even imagine to begin thinking about an alternative. They feel economically anxious and unwilling to either question the job, career, or industry they call their own. Or if they are starting internally to question it, they are unwilling to voice that questioning to others out of fear of risk to the perceived tenuous stability of their situation. Already living in a time of general superficial connection to everyone, accompanied by increasingly debilitating loneliness, they live in dire fear of being pushed to the social perimeter, to the land of loneliness, where the threat to emotional security defines social fear itself. And when throughout it all they are experiencing a historic structural shift so powerful that technological unemployment looms over almost every path they might choose, they feel even more anxious. The anxiety increases the pressure to survive and succeed in an endless bullshit chain at work, leading to either utterly institutionalized cynicism or utterly internalized desire for distraction from reality. As people begin to realize they are embedded within the system, and that the nature of modern society means that not only is it politically and environmentally unsustainable, but it is in the end morally indefensible, they cannot help but feel deeply uncomfortable. And yet they tell themselves through the buzz of underlying anxiety, at least I have my job, at least I have my career, at least I have my plan. All of it contingent on the personal societal stability of a supposedly linear history that is not true and has never been true by its very nature. We humans are not entirely stupid, and we certainly have a right to our emotions. We know in our minds and in our hearts that humanity is in the midst of perhaps the greatest period of change in history. I call it the phase change of human civilization, with more change coming, largely due to exponential innovations in science and technology in the next 20 to 30 years than the past 2,000 to 3,000. And the transition could be, and seemingly already is, very painful in so many ways, very disruptive, not only to our industries, but to our psyches. We cannot afford bullshit. We cannot afford a system that dehumanizes so that whatever security we create is at the expense of our humanity. We cannot afford a way of living that borrows in every conceivable way from the earth and from the future to pay for our present. We cannot afford to connect in such a way that we actually disconnect, so that more and more of us experience the terrifying loneliness of a person no longer living at the center of the universe made up of a few closest to themselves, but where everyone feels they are living on the edge of a social center they can never actually approach. We must fix things. We must tell the truth as a society to ourselves. We must honor how emotion drives us. And we must both accept that history is much more unpredictable than we'd like to think, and turn that thought around so we consider history to be flexible and recognize how much power we have to bend it. We are all in the business of social change, whether we call it that or not. How does social change happen? Imagine a river, and we're standing on one side. Imagine the river is one with dangerous rushing rapids. Imagine the other side is covered in a thick fog. The side of the river we're standing on right now is the world as it is. The other side of the river is the future, impenetrable to our vision. The rushing rapids of the river are the currents of history and the change we have to navigate, the change that stands between us and the future, the change it is human nature to fear. Social change happens when people are willing to cross the river, attracted to something better on the other side. Our collective task is to point out the unacceptable, the indefensible, and the unworkable about the world as it is, to develop new models and experimental visions that can test the future while attempting to build something better, and to paint a plausible picture of what a better system could look like. If we do that, which is what collectively we are doing, I believe, we will increase people's willingness to move to a new way of living. The phase change of civilization is happening anyway. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that as long as it's going to be changing that much anyway, why don't we make it into something much better, not just different? There is a new world coming, and it is being born in our time, and here in this room with people such as you, with dreams such as yours, with passions unhidden and deep commitment cheered on by your peers. Our societal anxiety is based on reality. We're not making this stuff up. Our society's hope and inspiration is also based on reality. You are real. Your incredible work is real. And I believe we will make it to the other side of the river, where things are better than they are now, especially if we start to do something we're not very good at: talking about the things we don't talk about. Thank you.